Perfect.
How is it going, Bears fans? Welcome back to another episode of Beared Down Uncut, the show where we talk everything Bears every day of the week, just about 30 hours after the Bears parted ways with Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace. They have quite the extensive list going at potential new candidates for the head coaching and general manager positions. Normally, we'd break them all down in one video, but there are some that stand out to us specifically where they think they deserve their own video. So today, in episode number 170 of Uncut, we're going to be discussing Brian Flores, the Miami Dolphins coach, former Miami Dolphins coach, that had a prize exit just a little bit ago. So we are going to be discussing whether or not the Bears should bring him in as a defensive-minded coach, and also talk about what potentially could go wrong with bringing in someone like Flores. So welcome back to the show, guys. Day 2 of our offseason coverage, kicking off with a video taking a look at one specific head coaching candidate. But we are going to be posting offseason content each and every day of the week. Feels good to be back and getting in a groove once again. So welcome back to the show. I am your host, Chris Malpe, today to talk about Brian Flores, someone who we saw, frankly, unexpectedly get fired by the Miami Dolphins just yesterday, along with Matt Nagy on Black Monday. I am joined with both of my co-hosts today, Parth as well as Jaylen McClinton. Guys, it's been a whirlwind of news the last 24 hours. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Just excited for all these news that's coming out of Hallis Hall. The Bears are doing their work. And I see some good names up there, and that excites me. And we're here to talk about another good name and just give our thoughts about him, I guess.
Jaylen, you are muted, my man. Still muted.
I always do this. But like I was saying, it's been a crazy, 48 hours. It doesn't feel like we just watched a Matt Nagy-led team, get outscored 31-3 in the second half, and now we're already looking at multiple options for head coach and GM. So it's definitely been a crazy, like I said, 48 hours. But I'm definitely excited. It's something we haven't experienced for 4 years.
Yeah, and obviously we know George McCaskey is leading the way in finding all these new hires, and he's doing his due diligence thus far. I feel like I have to give credit where credit's due. The Bears plan on video conferencing with all of the candidates that, they do have to put in some requests to teams, but all the candidates that they're able to talk to, they will talk over Zoom and then presumably bring some to Chicago if they impress. Today we're here, obviously, to talk about Brian Flores, but before we get into it specifically, let's take a look at the Bears' current GM head coach interview list. They currently have 9 head coaches slated to come in for interviews, assuming that pending requests get put through. Brian Flores, the one we would be discussing today, former Super Bowl champion and Eagles head coach Doug Peterson, Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn, Colts defensive coordinator Matt Eberflus, Packers offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett, Buccaneers offensive coordinator Byron Leftwich, Buccaneers defensive coordinator Todd Bowles, and then both of the Bills coordinators as well, Brian Daboll and Leslie Frazier. So the Bears are not leaving any stones unturned in this search. And that doesn't even get to their general manager list where they have 7 candidates as well. And these only get to continue to keep updating as the minutes move on. So today we are here to talk about Brian Flores, the embattled Miami Dolphins coach who just had quite the finish to the season and was unexpectedly fired. So let's hop into this, guys, because this is definitely an interesting one. You take a look at Flores' record as a head coach. He was 24-25, came into Miami in 2019 after being the linebackers coach for the New England Patriots. He was 5-11 in his first year. They finished last in the AFC East, but he's really turned it around the last 2 seasons. The 10-6 season in 2020, the COVID year, obviously we saw the Dolphins switch between Tua Tagovailoa as well as Ryan Fitzpatrick. They finished second in the AFC East that year at 10-6. And then this year was another promising story for them. Starting 1-7, it looked like things were all but over for Miami. They pulled out a stretch, won 7 games in a row, ended up finishing 9-8, barely missing the playoffs due to a loss in Week 17 to the Tennessee Titans. So Flores finished his tenure with the Dolphins 24-25 with a record of .49, just under 500. And the Dolphins were the first team in NFL history to lose 7 straight games and win 7 straight games in the same season. So it really shows how Flores turned around that culture there in Miami and got that team back on their feet. Parth, before we talk about Flores specifically with the Bears, when you take a look at his work in Miami, what are your thoughts, and do you think he deserved to be fired a couple of days ago?
Definitely not. Good coaches have some down years, and Miami, I felt like had a pretty competitive season. They had a 7-game winning streak, despite having I think a 9-game or 8-game losing streak to start the season or something like that. And their defense played incredible all year. They swept the Patriots, a team that they consider their rival team. And after sweeping your divisional opponent like that, I just don't see why they fired him. I do understand that they have 2 teams in their division that did go to the playoffs. But Flores was doing a good job. He's a really good leader, in my opinion. That defense was ranked top 10 the last 3 years under him. And that's something very important. This Bears defense has the potential to be top 10, just wasn't able to do it the last 2 seasons. And I feel like under Flores, that's a possibility. We'll talk more about what he can do to us. But with the Dolphins, I thought he did a really good job. And shouldn't have been fired. I think that was an early fire from them for sure.
Just based off of football, it was definitely a confusing firing,
Mhm.
in my opinion. Now, The Ringer put out an interesting article this morning after gathering a lot of data and talking to a lot of different people around the league. And it does seem like Brian Flores definitely had some issues with the Dolphins that extended beyond what happened on the field. It seems like he had a lot of relationships that he struggled to maintain and keep, most specifically with Dolphins GM Chris Greer, as well as Tua Tagovailoa. And it seemed like it deteriorated to not the greatest spot for Miami. There was a report that came out this morning, too, that back a couple of years ago, he wanted to draft Justin Herbert. Obviously, with that 3rd overall pick, the Dolphins ended up going with Tagovailoa, who's continued to improve since he's gotten into the league. I don't know if he's there yet, and he's definitely not at Justin Herbert level. But that seems like something that contributed to him getting fired. And it also seems, if we're being completely honest, that he got a little bit power hungry. Dolphins owner Stephen Ross came out in a statement and said that an organization can only function if it is collaborative and works well together. So, there are some reports that Flores wanted to have more power and have the final say on certain things, and that definitely is something that can't transpire over to Chicago if the Bears bring him in, especially with the new general manager being the head of football operations. But I still wouldn't have fired him regardless. It's a tough situation for the Dolphins to be in, and it seems like there were some off-the-field problems that had been deeply rooted for some time. But at the end of the day, he is a darn good coach. He did a great job turning around that defense. We'll talk about it a little bit later. I am a little bit worried about the offensive struggles that could possibly come with the Bears hiring him, who is a defensive-minded head coach, because the Bears defense is the least of their problems. But overall, I don't think he should have been fired. It's really impressive what he did the last 2 years, especially this past season with flipping the script completely and almost bringing that Dolphins team back to the playoffs. So 2 good seasons, the last 2 seasons, a record of 19-14 combined for Brian Flores. So overall, with that piece of work that he did, I don't think he should have been fired. But Jaylen, I'm going to pass it over to you. It seems like this story is only going to continue to develop with Flores and his past with the Dolphins as we continue to move forward. But personally, taking a look at it and what they've been able to achieve, especially in these last 2 seasons, do you think that he deserved to get fired yesterday?
I wouldn't necessarily deserve to get fired. I can see why, because in the last 2 seasons he was able to put the Dolphins team back in a playoff position, and they got blown out in playoff clinching games. I think they played the Bills last game of the season. If they win, they were in, and they got blown out. And I think this year was against the Titans last week, where if they won, they were in the playoffs, and they got blown out. So I think that played a part into it as well. But 19-14 in 3 seasons, uh, always competitive, especially the last 2 seasons when he had a decent roster, to put this team in a position to make the playoffs. He did it. So, I could, like I said, I don't think it was justifiable, but he did give them reasons, like you said, it maybe been stuff off the field or outside the organization. Him wanting more power when that wasn't gonna happen because they did get a new GM and Chris Greer and stuff like that. So. I definitely think he's a good coach. He comes from that Belichick, tree. I think he's probably one of the most successful ones that's came out, especially outside of I can't think of the head coach from Tennessee,
Outside of
but
Joe Judge. Just kidding.
Yeah, he's probably one of the only coaches that's getting out coached by Matt Nagy in 2022. So, but yeah, I definitely feel like Brian Flores is a good head coach. A defensive guy, and we might be looking to go that route after failing to find an offensive group.
Yeah. Now, taking a look at the list of the Bears head coaching candidates so far, it seems pretty evenly split between bright offensive names and bright defensive names. I think all three of us would agree that we'd probably prefer to go the offensive route. If you're bringing someone in, Justin Fields is the face of your franchise. You want to get someone in who can develop him, maintain a good relationship with him, and really get this offense kicking. But it seems like with who the Bears are looking at, they might end up settling for a situation where they bring in a defensive minded head coach. Maybe the Bears defense gets back up near that 2018 level. And then you bring in a good offensive coordinator. And if the Bears did that, and we'll get to that a little bit later, that's a situation that Flores would be in. But Parth, I'm going to pass it to you first. Taking a look at this list, I mean, there are a lot of bright offensive names that would definitely stand out with Justin Fields more than someone like a Brian Flores. Guys like Brian Dable, guys like Byron Leftwich, guys like Nathaniel Hackett, guys like Doug Peterson. So, taking a look at the Bears list that is already extensive, do you think Brian Flores is a candidate that the Bears should strongly considering hiring here? Strongly
Absolutely.
consider hiring, excuse me.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Uh, those reports about him becoming power hungry and everything, if he can put that aside here in Chicago, because he's going to have a new GM to work with and maybe a GM that he wants to work with, and those two pair up and come here in Chicago, that would be a really good type of move, I guess, as well. But I think he's someone who is a really good leader, wins games, and can bring in a pretty good coaching staff with him. I think he's done a good enough job in Miami to prove that he is a good head coach in this league. And I feel like a lot of offensive coordinators that are currently not, don't have positions, or other offensive coaches that don't have positions right now would look to work with him. I feel like he's someone who has shown to win games, even with Tua Tagovailoa, who is someone still developing in his second or third year. And if the reports were true that he wanted Herbert over Tua, that means he knows a little bit about the offensive side as well. And he's excited. If he's excited to work with Fields, I would be down to do this hire any day of the week.
Yeah, I do think he's a candidate that I would like the Bears to consider hiring. At the end of the day, we've seen him in Miami completely flip the script the last two seasons, and he's a winner. And something also that stands out is while he might have been in battle with a couple of his players, specifically Tunga Vailoa, he's a leader of men, and he has that head coaching experience. The only other people on this list that have that experience are Doug Peterson, who was the coach of the Eagles, Dan Quinn, who was the coach of the Falcons, and then I also believe Todd Bowles, who was the coach of the Jets, and Leslie Frazier as well with the Vikings. But we know he's a winner. He's very much so recently been a winner. So he's definitely someone I'd like the Bears to take a look at. Obviously, you'd have to take who's going to be running the offense into consideration, but the Bears have always been a team that's built on a strong defense. Brian Flores would most definitely be able to add to that as a defensive play caller. So he's someone that definitely pops out on this list to me. Jaylen, I'm going to pass it around to you before we talk a little bit about Flores' offensive struggles. Is he a candidate that you think, taking a look at this list, the Bears should strongly consider hiring?
He's not one of my top guys. I personally have a couple offensive guys ahead of him, like Dapple, like Byron Leftwich, for the people that we've requested to interview so far. But like you said, the track record the last 2 years, now counting his first season where he had a terrible roster, and he still won a couple games, with a bunch of UDFA's and late round guys. So, like I said, the last 2 years he's been proving that he can, win games and put his team in position, like I said, to make the playoffs. With him being, available, I'm not surprised that the Bears are interested in him. So, I'm not mad that they're at least interviewing him. At least, even if he doesn't get the job, just talking with him, seeing how he feels about the team is something I'm definitely down for.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see how that plays out. He's one of those coaches on the market right now that big reporters are saying are going to get a lot of interviews in this cycle and probably will get hired. So, regardless of whether or not it's in Chicago, I'm sure we'll more than likely see Brian Flores coaching in maybe not a head coaching role, but most definitely a defensive coordinator role or something like that when it comes to the next season. Before we close this one out, let's talk a little bit about his offensive struggles as a head coach, because I think that's something you can't overlook, especially when the Bears have their franchise quarterback. They've had struggles with the offense for years. And taking a look at Miami's offense, they have done better. We saw Tagovailoa put together his best season just this last season. He was actually pretty consistent throughout the year. Good touchdown to interception ratio. But we saw the Dolphins basically the entire year produce an abysmal run game. I do know they are a team that was very hurt. They were missing their wide receiver one, Devonta Parker. He was on IR, on the COVID list, all over the place throughout the season. But we did see good seasons out of guys like Jaylen Waddle and stuff. But obviously, looking at this head coaching hiring and what the Bears have to get it done right now, they have to produce better on offense, regardless of who the candidate ends up being that gets hired by the Bears. So, Parth, I'm going to pass it back to you. Obviously, Brian Flores is a defensive-minded head coach. Taking a look at his last couple of years in Miami, do his offensive struggles as a head coach and in the past concern you if the Bears were to bring him in?
A little bit, that's for sure. But the first question I would ask him if I was going to hire him is, who do you want to bring in as your offensive coordinator? And if he gives me some solid names and that intrigues me, then I would definitely be interested in hiring him. Again, at the end of the day, he's a defensive-minded coach, so he definitely would have to bring in a strong offensive coordinator for me to even want to consider hiring him. And yeah, I mean, his past struggles are a little bit concerning. But again, I'm someone who doesn't think that Tua Tagovailoa is that great of a quarterback. And I feel like he's a borderline starter, and I feel like that made it tougher for him to win games with him. So
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and agree with you. I'd say they're slightly concerning, but at the end of the day, the National Football League isn't about anything but winning football games.
mhm.
He's won 19 games the last two seasons in comparison to 14 losses. He's had two winning seasons in a row, and he's produced some killer defenses. If Chicago can get their defense back into a better spot, maybe they have some offensive struggles, but if you can bring in someone that can continue to progress the Bears' offense better than Matt Nagy did, I'd be fine with hiring Brian Flores. But once again, I got to agree with you, Parth. He's got to have coaches ready to contact. He's got to have a staff ready to be put in place, regardless of where he's hired. So if the Bears can buy into it and believe his message that the offense is going to be better and hoping that Justin Fields pans out how he should, I think I could put the offensive struggles that he's had in the past behind me, because I know the Bears have some weapons. They got to continue to progress in terms of building an offensive line and getting receivers around Fields. But you know that you're going to have a cutthroat defense with Flores, and if you can get the right offensive pieces, the right offensive coaches around him, I think you could be in for something special here in Chicago. So, Jaylen, before we close this one off, I'm going to pass this to you. This is something you mentioned previously, just that his offenses have been stagnant for years. We've seen them have a pretty porous run game outside of a couple good games from Duke Johnson, as well as their running back one, Myles Gaskin. But taking a look at Flores, if the Bears are seriously considering this, which at this point it seems like they are because they're taking absolutely everything into account, do Flores' offensive struggles as a head coach in the past concern you in this Bears offense?
How can they not? We just came off Matt Nagy, who was an offensive guru, and our offense was the worst, side of our team for the past 4 years. So like I agree with you guys. If he can bring in an offensive coordinator, plus we draft the right pieces and get an offensive line and get Justin some more weapons, and also bring in a quarterback coach that can help develop Justin coming into his second year. I'm totally fine with that. Like I said, but it's all ifs. Of course, him struggling on offense is going to scare a lot of, especially Bears fans. We're going to have PTSD, watching a piss poor offense for another, 3-4 years. If we are successful, no matter how long he stays here. So it's definitely going to be, concerning. But if you bring in the right offensive pieces, that he trusts, and can scheme up a good enough offense to score points and help us win games, that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I got to go ahead and agree with you. There are so many which ways the Bears could go with this hiring process in terms of from the top to the bottom. Obviously they already removed Ted Phillips from football operations, but general manager, which way you want to go. Obviously at head coach, and then everything else below that, with possibly clearing out the entire staff as well. There's going to be a lot of moving pieces in Chicago moving forward, and Brian Flores is definitely one that will be kept in mind. Thank you guys so much for tuning into episode number 170 of Uncut. This is just our second video of the offseason, and there's so much more to talk about with a lot of these candidates. So we are going to be coming back with Bears videos and podcasts each and every day for you guys. So if you haven't already, wherever you may be listening, do us a favor, drop a like, subscribe, follow. I'm sure we're going to continue to talk about some of these other guys. Matt Eberflus, Byron Leftwich, Doug Peterson. There's a lot to talk about. And even at the general manager position, there's a lot to talk about, too, with guys like Rick Smith that they were bringing in. So a lot of intriguing Bears news coming soon. You're not going to want to miss it. We're going to be covering it here, the most comprehensive Bears coverage on the web. If you'd like to find more content from us outside of the podcast, you can head to our website, beareddown.com. If you would like to find the podcast on Instagram and Twitter, you can find it on both platforms at Beared Down. And finally, you can find the links to all of our personal social media pages down in the description. For myself, as well as Parth and Jaylen, our Instagram and Twitter pages, you can see our thoughts on all things Bears, all things NFL postseason, as well as the entirety of Chicago sports. So Parth Shaw, Jaylen McClinton, Bears definitely building up an impressive list here. Any last words before we sign off?
Yeah, they got lots of work to do. It's a step in the right direction.
Bear down. I hope you don't make the wrong decision again. I can't do it for another 4 years.
I was going to say, I like that they're doing their due diligence, and I think it's the right path to take it. You know, It seems like they aren't, I said it earlier, they aren't leaving any stones unturned. They aren't leaving any options off the table. But it's still essential that you get this decision right. You've got your franchise quarterback entering his second season, an offense that just needs to get going, and a defensive unit that could still use some improvement as well. And not to mention the general manager who's going to be the president of football operations. Everything's going to be so important, and is it going to really sprawl out what's going to happen the next couple of years in Chicago. So I really hope that Bill Polian, I guess Ted Phillips to an extent, and George McCaskey are putting in hard work and make the right choice here. Guys, it's been a pleasure to be your host. Once again, my name is Chris Maltby. We're going to continue to cover the Bears offseason throughout these next couple of weeks and months here on the channel as well as on the podcasting platform. So continue to join us. It's a pleasure to be back. We love doing this stuff. And Bears fans, as always, do us a favor and stay safe and bear down. We'll see you guys once again tomorrow discussing a new topic, I'm sure. And that's pretty much it for us. We'll see you in the next one. Peace out.